Yeah.
He's not nervous about me.
Yeah.
He's going to a bank convention.
How much those is not unspoken.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's not going to get homesick.
Yeah.
I said I could go with him, you know, but
He's a big boy.
no.
Oh, me. All right. Miss Connie, will you open us in a word of prayer?
Lord, we continue just giving you praise and glory for the privilege from God. Lifting up petitions of those from God that need a special touch from you. Thank you, Lord, for being our presence, and thank you, Lord, that we can intercede anytime and help us, Lord, to be more faithful to pray one for another. Thank you, Lord, for prayers answered on my behalf already, Lord. Well, just lift up everybody on the prayer board. Pray for the children, grandchildren, the elderly, especially, Lord, and the ones, Lord, that need to take a special touch from you. They will be in our nurses. Help us to learn more about the book of Ruth. Help us know where to study next. We have us to him that bless us with some more wisdom. Thank you, Lord, for your presence here, like I said, and we just lift this service up to you, this family and class in our service tonight, and Mother, ask you for this mercy, and this in Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. All right. We are in chapter 4, the last chapter of Ruth. I think this is a record, finishing a book in 7 weeks. I'm not sure I've ever done that. So, I don't know, maybe, hopefully I did it justice. I don't know. That always scares me. We are with Ruth waiting to find out how Boaz is going to resolve the matter as Naomi leaves it, or settle the matter. Remember that Ruth has gone to Boaz. She has done what Naomi told her to do, which was to go in there and lay down and, uncover his feet and the whole bit. And so she does this. When he wakes up, she says, I need you to spread your wings over me. I need you to take care of me. I need a kinsman redeemer, basically. And Boaz says, fine, I'll do that for you if your other relative doesn't want it. Remember that one of the things that this reveals is Boaz's character, right? He's somebody who, even when presented with this opportunity, probably knowing exactly how it's going to play out with the other guy, he still follows the chain of command, the protocol, the law, whatever it is, and gives the other kinsman redeemer the opportunity to accept the responsibility or to reject it before he steps in. So basically what Ruth has is sort of like a built-in backup plan. If old buddy says no, then Boaz is willing to take her, and she knows he is willing to take both Ruth and Naomi, right? And so one of the things that we said last week was legally Boaz does not have any obligation to any of them. He is acting in the spirit of the law, which is in the spirit of that kinsman redeemer position, but he's not actually required to do this. He chooses to do it. Whereas it seems like, based on what he says at the end of chapter 3, whoever this other guy is would be required to say yes or no. So we don't really know who this guy is, and I'll show you something that's kind of funny in the text in just a second related to that. But that's where we are. So we're going to kind of blitz through this. This is not, chapter 3 is probably the most complicated chapter because it is sort of establishing those cultural norms. Chapter 4 is not too bad, so let's see what we got, looking at verses 1 through 6 first. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, but if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, meaning the other guy, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So, we talked about this a little bit last week. You know, everything's all fine and hunky-dory until Ruth gets added to the transaction. And then all at once, other guys like, this might mess up my inheritance, so you can have it if you want it. And we sort of made a joke, when you add another woman, whatever. That's not really what this is about. This is about the Moabite factor. This is about the fact that Ruth is in that sort of what I'm going to call tribal gray area, where they're not really part of the prohibition, but the cultural assumption has been that if you don't mess with the Ammonites, you also don't mess with the Moabites, you don't marry them, you don't bring them in, you don't do that kind of thing. And so this guy really just doesn't want to deal with the social aspect of having to marry Ruth and having to bring her into his household. But what I said I was going to mention to you that I think is sort of funny on this, there in the middle kind of the screen, so Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. That is a Hebrew phrase, peloni al-omoni, which simply means, basically, I say simply, we would translate that to Mr. So-and-so. He's entirely unnamed. His influence and his impact is so irrelevant, he's entirely unnamed. Now, why do I think that's interesting? Because in the culture, the Jewish man would matter. Ruth would be the one who theoretically should be unnamed because she's the outsider and she's the woman. But instead, remember, Boaz has been very, very intentional with Ruth. Ruth, my daughter, you have a place. Even Naomi's looking at Ruth. Ruth, my daughter. This guy is just Mr. So-and-so. Because he is basically meaningless in this story, except as kind of a counter to Boaz, right? Basically what he's really saying, what Boaz is really saying here is, Naomi has a field. She needs to sell it to raise money to live on. If there were a kinsman redeemer, however, he could buy that field and keep it in the family. So the issue here with the piece of land, because this is totally new information, we haven't heard anything about the land up until now, but we've got this, everybody wants land, right? That's sort of the name of the game. You get more land, you increase the size of your territory, so to speak, the size of your farm, whatever it is that you have. So this is already family land. She needs to sell it, so why don't you buy it from Naomi, but then why don't you also bring her in, so you're really not losing any money, you're gaining some family and you're gaining some land. Seems like a fair deal. The buyer would get to add that property to his own inheritance, right? But the issue is, are there children involved? Meaning, Mr. So-and-so here, does he have kids already? If he has kids already, this gets complicated because there is an inheritance which his children are already heir to, and then if he brings Ruth in and he and Ruth have a child, that property gets split again, right? So it gets brought in just to get split back out. So when this guy makes the argument and he says, it would mess up my inheritance if Ruth is part of it, it's a pragmatic, fair point. It would mess up what he has already got going. This is what makes the kinsman-redeemer issue so complicated, and why you look at it on the face and you think, oh, well, that's nice. That just ensures that the widows are taken care of. But then when you take it from the man's perspective, it really is a legal conundrum. Because then you have to decide who gets what and what property belongs to which child and which part of the family, and I've got money, where does the money go? And if you've got farm animals, you've got to decide, if these animals go on this part of the property, then they become part of the inheritance too. I mean, it's really, really complicated. So this guy's like, I just don't want to deal with that. The impulse is gone when he finds out that Ruth is a part of this. So he backs away from the deal. It looks like a can't miss real estate deal until you add taking care of an old lady and marrying a young Moabite woman. Then it becomes a problem. The other thing that you have to think about in terms of the financial aspect of this is he'd actually be losing resources, because even though he's gaining the field as part of his property, if there is a child between he and Ruth, that child is entitled to part of what his children are entitled to and what they're entitled to from whoever their father was, that piece of property from their father. So, I mean, again, I'm just trying to stress this would be a complicated thing. But the kinsman-redeemer, and this is the moral kicker to me, the kinsman-redeemer aspect of the law was set up as a ministry to the poor. You buy somebody out of slavery who has sold themselves in order to repay their debt, right? That's part one of the whole kinsman-redeemer bit. Ruth is not in slavery, but Mr. So-and-so here is only interested in ministry to the poor if there's a payoff for himself. So whereas Boaz is like, here, take all the grain you want, let me give you 80 pounds. Remember we said that last week. Go take 80 pounds of grain back to Naomi. I'm willing to give beyond what is expected in the law. This guy is taking advantage of the law to say, that wouldn't work out so well for me. Reasonable argument, but not in the same spirit as Boaz, right? So the irony, again, is that by seeking to protect his future legacy in this way, he actually ends up leaving himself nameless. I mean, this is sort of like Orpah. Remember, we got like 2 or 3 sentences from Orpah, and then she marches off the pages of the Bible, right? Same thing with this guy. He could have had a legacy. Instead of Boaz, we could be talking about this guy, or both of them, how Boaz arranged this so that Ruth would be taken care of. But we're not there. And so he misses out on the opportunity to have a part of the legacy of God's plan of salvation. All right, here's the application just for a minute, even though I'm not preaching. I've been on a roll today, so we'll see what happens. How many of us, in the interest of our own self-interest, have missed out on our opportunity to be a part of God's legacy of salvation? Who have we not ministered to that we were supposed to minister to because it would be inconvenient for us, or it would be costly to us, or require some self-sacrifice, or some cultural side glances? I think about
I just miss the Lord. I mean, like,
Yeah.
see somebody, I have thought about that afterwards. I said, shoot, I didn't say, I could have said something about and yeah, I hate that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about, like, and I always go back to this. Y'all know it's maybe my favorite Jesus moment in the New Testament outside of, the big ones, was Jesus with the woman at the well. That was social suicide to talk to that woman. She's been married 5 times. That's putting it nicely, right? She had 5 husbands, Jesus says, and the one that you're living with is not your husband. But I think what's interesting is in John's gospel, when you read that passage, John also includes the phrase, the disciples dared not ask him why he was talking to her. They have learned this. He's gonna do this. This is part of the ministry. He's gonna go and talk to the people that he shouldn't. And by the way, most of them were the people he shouldn't be talking to. So they've got firsthand experience. I mean, y'all know how I feel about flattening Jesus out and making him not human. I think we do that, and it creates a problem, because I can imagine that if, I don't know, say Matthew had walked up to Jesus and had been like, why are you talking to her? Jesus could have easily turned and looked at him and said, well, I talked to you, didn't I? I mean, and would have been right in saying it. So, I mean, there's this sense in which you've got that same idea here. Boaz is not afraid of what other people are going to think. He's not put off by that. It's the right thing to do, regardless. So he takes the more sacrificial approach. Boaz takes the more sacrificial approach. He embraces the opportunity to leave a legacy that's somebody else's legacy. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the way this thing is envisioned, is you are helping to leave somebody else's legacy. And so let's go over to 7 through 10. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So we're going to trade shoes about it. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Now, he didn't say anything about Chilion and Mahlon when he was talking to Mr. Sir over here. Notice that is Ruth's now deceased husband and Orpah's now deceased husband. Now, how does he have a claim to what should have belonged to Orpah? She stayed in Moab. So there was no kinsman redeemer for her. And all of that land that is there in Jerusalem, or in Bethlehem rather, is Naomi's. So when Mr. So-and-so here says, I'll take Naomi's property, but I don't want to take Ruth, well, he's actually missing out on Naomi, Elimelech's property, Chilion's property, Mahlon's property. I mean, he shot himself in the foot, so to speak. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So, one of the features of Ruth 4 is the preservation of names. You see that in verse 10. That the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. It is preserving the names of Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion with their inheritance, right? And to wish in the blessing, if we keep going, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. I'm just going to leave it right there for a minute because Boaz has ensured the enduring legacy of Elimelech and Chilion and Mahlon, and they are ensuring the legacy of Boaz. The people of the city, the elders and the witnesses there are saying, your name is going to be remembered for this. So it's not just that we got him here in the scripture. The idea is even culturally, Boaz is somebody that you look up to. From the people who rejected Ruth when she walked into town. And now these are the people who are saying, Boaz, you're going to be remembered for this. We're going to make sure of it. All right, let's keep going in this section. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. This amuses me how fast that the story just moves now. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. There it is again. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. They're not talking about Boaz. They're talking about the child that is the redeemer of Naomi, who, by the way, we're going to see it in just a minute, is Obed, who is the great-grandfather of King David. Obed, Jesse, David. Right? So it's this preservation of names. When we get to verse 17, we'll see Obed has a double meaning. I don't want to talk about that yet. But the common thread in the book of Ruth, one of them, is the desire to keep one's name alive. It's the desire to have a legacy. It's the desire to have a lasting name. And so even though Mr. So-and-so and Boaz don't necessarily realize it at the time, that's what is at stake. And Mr. So-and-so is not willing to risk what he already has for the possibility of recognition in the future. And Boaz doesn't care about recognition in the future because he's doing the right thing. So you can see, like, this even ties in with some of what we were talking about this morning with pride. Pride is what keeps Mr. So-and-so from taking this on. And Boaz's lack of pride is what allows him to sacrifice and be blessed for it. So the one who married Ruth is not just getting a woman of character with an impressive work ethic. Remember, she can haul 80 pounds of grain, so she should go get her. But he's not just getting somebody with this impressive work ethic. He's also received a place in God's plan. And the line of Boaz and Ruth, again, would stretch on to include Obed, then Jesse, then David the king after God's own heart, and travel all the way through to Jesus, right? But by trying to protect his future, Mr. So-and-so is just Mr. So-and-so. I just want to go back and think for just a minute. We do this. What's in it for me? How will this fulfill me? How will this make me feel better? And yet, what will it cost me? Or my favorite, this is me attacking my students just a little bit. Will I enjoy it? Is this something that is this fun? Is this something that I'm going to like? It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. God's math doesn't work that way, right? We calculate and protect ourselves, and we insist. Miss Jane Middleton would love this part. We insist that 2 + 2 must be 4. I ask her when I was in her class every year for 4 years, who decided that 2 + 2 was 4? And she continually got frustrated at me every time I asked that. But here it is. For God, it doesn't have to be. In our human mind, if you are Mr. So-and-so and you're presented with that opportunity, it'd be real hard for you not to make the same decision because we're going to protect ourselves. Because our logical minds, we would look at it and we would see, this is complicated, it's going to make things messy, might mess some stuff up. Can't do that to my family, not going to do that. And then we never know the blessing that we lost. So part of the message of Ruth, yes, preservation of names, but also that God, the plan of God, operates on an entirely different level than we do. Fullness runs through emptiness in God's plan. Think about Naomi when she first gets to Bethlehem. I am Mara, I am bitter. Everything I ever had, God took away from me. He killed my husband. My 2 sons are dead. I've got this woman that won't leave me alone. This is horrible. Woe is me. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. There's your Redeemer through the emptiness.
I want to say something about Ruth.
Go ahead.
Ruth said that she had to be a pretty stout woman to carry 80 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to take up for Ruth. She may not have been very big.
That's true.
Now, I remember growing up, we had to feed the cows.
Yep.
And we backed the pickup truck or the trailer up to the hay barn. And Diane, Dot couldn't, but Diane could pick them hay bales up, put them over her head and throw them in the truck.
Uh-huh.
She didn't weigh no 100 pounds at the time, you know?
Yep.
I mean, we were young teenagers doing that.
Yep.
And, so, you know, she's already walked ever how many miles to get there.
Right.
She had to be in good shape.
Right. That's true. That's true.
She may have been a stout woman, and she may not have been.
But they were big women.
They
Yeah.
were.
They wait. Yeah. And
They
either.
were big women by genetics.
And either way, I don't want to tie up with Ruth in a dark alley, because either she's the short woman that you don't want to make mad, or she's the woman that's bigger than me. So
Well, you knew Diane, she was bigger too.
She's one of my favorite people.
so Naomi, let's think about Naomi for just a minute as we kind of wrap this up. Again, she lost everything that she had been clinging on to, loses everything. But if she had not lost everything, we would never have known anything about her, and she would never have come to appreciate Ruth's true worth. She would never have grown in her understanding of the Lord. And if she had not lost her 2 sons, then she would not be able to appreciate the one who was better than 7 sons. Sometimes, and some of you can speak to this far better than I can, but sometimes you've got to go through the valley to get the blessing on the other side. All right? So this suffering is necessary for her spiritual growth. Right? We had him on the prayer list for a while, a teacher at PCS who had some stomach surgery and that kind of stuff. But anyway, they sent us an email and told us one day to be there before school, and we were going to have a short faculty meeting. So we did, and it was to get together to pray for this guy. And they asked the Bible teacher if he would pray. And this was probably, I'm just going to say it's because I'm not Presbyterian that I'd never thought in this way. But when Mr. Wiggins prayed, he said, "Lord, please remove from Don all suffering except that which is necessary for his edification." And I thought, wow, what a prayer. That's a hard prayer to pray for somebody else. You'll pass. Let's not suffer for edification. How about that? See, but I mean, our prayer would be like, find some other way to edify us, please. You know. But here is the biblical example of that. Like, you know, Naomi is shaking her fist at God in chapter 1, and now by chapter 4, she's seeing the other side.
I mean, she came out so
Yeah, yeah.
That's your whole years it took.
I mean, when they get to Bethlehem, Ruth is working for 6 or 8 months in the field before Naomi tells her to go confront Boaz, basically. So, I mean, who knows how long it took them to have the kid, but 3 or 4 verses. 3 verses, yeah. I don't know. So,
Well,
time
then the same as time is now.
right. Yeah. No, kidding. So we got Naomi really, really bad at thinking about this new math that God's doing, right? I mean, like she's really bad at it. Boaz, on the other hand, is like an A student. He gets it. But we see that with Boaz. When we first meet Boaz, we're reminded that he is a man of character and that he is a man who loves the Lord. So his willingness to submit to the uncomfortable social problems were not really of any concern because he knew that God was going to bless him for doing what he was supposed to do. Whether anybody else cared anything about it or not, he has an open heart for the poor. He's generous in giving to Ruth. He's generous in, taking care of her when nobody knows anything about her. What he knows about her comes from the foreman in the field who says, yeah, they've been talking about her and she seems like she's pretty all right. She's been taking care of Naomi. But as far as knowing anything about her character, it's secondhand information, and yet he's generous to her anyway because he sees her as a person in need. Even here, he's not marrying Ruth for what he can get out of the deal. Presumably, he does not need children. He does not need family. I mean, he is a man of means. He's doing well. This is going to be a losing prospect, humanly speaking. Mr. So-and-so figured that out. But the Lord's wisdom operates differently, and Boaz knows that. So part of that is putting what the Lord thinks of us ahead of what the world thinks of us. And this is the point where I begin to preach to myself, because I'm one of those people that I think very carefully and try to maneuver very carefully so nobody gets the wrong idea, right? Whoop-de-doo. Am I doing what is right? Yes or no? Are you doing what is right? Yes or no? But now I will say, you have to do what is right in the right way. And we saw that little moment with Naomi where the Hebrew is so ambiguous in what she tells Ruth to do that Naomi could be suggesting that she not do something so righteous. And it's Ruth who says, I'm going to modify this just a little bit so we can remove some doubt here. But it could be that you see Naomi trying to get a right from a wrong. You don't see that with Boaz. Right? He makes it clear that the transaction is not about him and his own interests, but about others. About meeting the needs of Ruth and Naomi and preserving the remembrance of their dead husbands. At the end of the day, were it not for this story, Boaz, he would have become maybe a folk hero, and then he probably would have fallen out of remembrance. I mean, even though they're telling him you're going to be remembered forever for this, chances are highly likely 2 or 3 generations, if it's just Boaz, he's probably gone. Or the story's modified to such a degree it's not believable anymore. You know how stuff goes. But this is God working in Boaz's behalf. So he's preserving Boaz's legacy. Let's think about Ruth and Tamar. I told you we would talk about Tamar. Now, Miss Connie has been very upset with me because I keep saying Ruth and Tamar and not Rahab. The reason I keep saying Ruth and Tamar and not Rahab is because Rahab was accounted for her work with the spies in Jericho. Tamar and Ruth are doing a more similar thing. So Rahab's got her own thing up here. With Ruth and Tamar, if you go back to Genesis chapter 38, that's where you get the Tamar stuff. And Tamar is an outsider, just like Ruth, to God's covenant people. She married into the family under doubtful circumstances. She loses her husband and she has no child. I mean, you're seeing the one-to-ones here between Ruth and Tamar, but that's where they stop. Because Ruth reveals her identity to Boaz as a child legitimately, whereas Tamar dresses up, pretends to be a prostitute in order to seduce her father-in-law, Judah, so she can receive a child outside of marriage because she's not trusting the plan. I mean, in short, she's not trusting the plan. So, 2 different moral positions that they're both in, right? God uses both of them. And so we look at that lineage and Tamar, Ruth, Rahab. I mean, you've got all of these different kinds of people. Now, all right, the men are not any better. I mean, let's not rag on the women in the family tree here. The men are not any better. Judah knew that he was sleeping with somebody who was a prostitute and did it anyway. I mean, maybe he didn't know that it was Tamar, but he knew what he was doing was wrong, and yet he did it anyway. David, we've left Bathsheba out, and nobody mentioned her. David is arranging for the murder of Bathsheba's husband so he can have her. I mean, when you start thinking about what people are willing to do, and Ruth stands as a stark contrast to all of that. And Boaz is a stark contrast to all of that, right?
Deborah ended up being one of the prophets. Deborah, how'd she end up?
Because the men sucked. I mean, let's just be honest about it. None of the men were worth a flip except maybe the first one, whose name I can't remember. Sorry, I'm going to run a rabbit on Deborah for just a minute. But even she had Barak, and he was weak and couldn't handle it, and he needed Deborah's strength to pull it off. I mean, y'all know I have an unbaptist opinion about women and all of this, but what it is for me as I think about this, and you think about Jesus' lineage or David's lineage, wherever you want to put the stopper, is these are a great procession of the unwashed, right? These are not clean people. They're not pristine people. They're not pure people. They're all problematic. Dare I say they're all human. They're all human. I'm not saying that because, you can just say, well, I'm human, I'm going to go do X, Y, or Z. That's not the impulse here, but at the same time, we need not wait on somebody to be perfect. We're going to be waiting a while. And God uses our imperfections. In our weakness, He is made strong. Bless you. So why, here's a fun question, and we'll come back and grab the last verses in just a minute, but why would Jesus choose to be descended from such a soiled line? I mean, in the divine providence of God in eternity past, He could have put together the most pristine, beautiful, whitewashed line of family for Jesus, and there could have been no doubt when Jesus showed up and claimed to be the Messiah. Well, it would make sense. After all, everybody in that family is perfect. I mean, you think about it even with kids now, like certain behaviors, right? Well, they get that from their mama, they get that from their daddy, they're just like their granddaddy, whatever. They're just like ...
But, when we look back, and we wrote this out in my class this morning, I think Mandy did, it wasn't just the common people that had problems. Look at Aaron's sons, they didn't go by what they were told to do either. And another thing we said, God snuffed them out back then.
Right.
Snuffed you out today, we probably live a totally different life.
That's it. That's it.
Yep.
Matthew's gospel, and I should have put this on the screen, but you shall call his name Jesus. This is the angel to Joseph, for he will save his people. Not the people, not a people. He's not even pulling a John and saying the world. He will save his people. Well, his people have to be in need of something, right? In need of a Savior. So he comes to rescue sinners. He's the friend of the sinner, right? He comes, he comes, here we go. Here's me and my weird theology again. He comes into the world naked and unprotected. He's not separated from sinners. He's right smack in the middle of them. I mean, the whole time. And that was the way that people knew him. The friend of sinners, as Matthew tells us. The friend of tax collectors. The Pharisees like to come after him on that one, right? And so when he dies, how does he die? On house arrest in a beautiful white mansion somewhere? With two thieves on either side. He went out the same way he came in. Naked and unprotected. And surrounded by sinners. So, that's how, just another brick in the wall of how he would save sinners. By coming among us, right? Let's look at these last verses before Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Well, who's Perez? Tamar's son. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And there's the end of the book. No, and they lived happily ever after, but that's pretty close. That's pretty close. Preserving the name, preserving the legacy. Elimelech, Kilian, Mahlon, Boaz, yes. God. Through all of this, God is preserving his own name and his own legacy. And he's using problematic people to do it. And he continues to do that. So, I don't know what you want to do with the rest of Ruth. What other thoughts you want to have about it? I'm hesitant to, make too many more comments just because I don't want to beat blood out of a turnip, so to speak. But it's a good idea now to go and think about this and to think about Jesus in relationship to every one of these primary characters. There's no sin that's too great that can separate you from the love of God. Naomi walks in and blasphemes for all she's worth. He hates me. He's taken from me. He's left me empty. He hasn't provided. Literally, running the list. What does he do? Takes care. Ruth walks into a culture she knows from a distance, right? She knows in sort of like one family unit, but she doesn't know how this is going to work when everybody's doing that. Everybody's living that way, but she chooses to go. And she walks into all of this not knowing how it's going to pan out, just knowing that she's going with Naomi, and that's what she's doing. Choosing, by the way, doesn't have any responsibility. We like to draw the connection between Boaz and Jesus. What about the connection between Ruth and Jesus? Make us a little uncomfortable because, we're thinking man to woman here, but the characteristics of God and God's love are demonstrated through Ruth as well. That she would sacrifice herself for someone whom she didn't have to. And she would go where she probably wasn't wanted. There's Jesus again, right? And then Boaz. He's not legally required to do any of this, but by doing it, he fulfills a law. And what does Jesus do? I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So, you've got just archetypes of Jesus all over Ruth. So, I'm not going to say any more than that. Think about it. See what God wants to do with it for you. Like this. I can't tell you what to think about it at the end of the day. I can give you the culture, I can give you the background, I can give you the personalities, but what you do with it, I think, is between you and what God has for you in it. So that's the way the whole Bible is, but some of it's more cut and dry than others. Like, we can explain Paul ranting about hypocritical Jews more easily than this. Right? So, all right. Questions, comments before we're done?
Would you like to know what the relationship between Naomi and Ruth was prior to the death of the husband and two sons?
Mm-hmm.
When she noted, she asked what seems not very kind from the moment Ruth said, I need you to whatever else, and they aren't very kind, or she's not very kind. So you gotta wonder, was she already bitter to begin with because her sons married this Moabite women?
She could be, but she moved them there, so she kind of gave them no choice.
She did, but she regretted that move,
Well,
apparently.
yeah. I don't know. And the Bible doesn't tell us.
No, it doesn't. That's just
you know.
my thought was, wouldn't you like to know what that relationship was?
Yeah.
That brought about all that.
Yeah.
This might not have anything to do with it, any of the lesson, but it's talking about women, I don't know if y'all had this down now, but I can remember bringing somebody to church, and I can't remember some Thomas Irish buddies and friends, probably bunch of buddies and stuff that didn't know much about the Bible, but they came to Sunday school, and there was a woman teacher,
Uh-huh.
they walked out, and they said they couldn't, women's not supposed to be teaching.
Prove it. Anyway, y'all know I'm bad on that. All right, so where do you want to go next? We're done with Ruth. Where do we want to go?
You had said James was.
It's in my.
All
All right. Do y'all want to get beat up in the morning and at night? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, let's do Hebrews. I'm love on you.
I mean, that'd be easy. I still have my Hebrews notes, so. All right. James, any objections to James aside from Luther's objection? Yeah. Yeah. Well.
That's already mine.
Yeah. We'll come in, and then the lights will be down, and the somber music will be playing.
He's doing the money.
That's.
Ruth has always been my favorite book, and where she leads in verse 16,
Mm-hmm.
because she was willing to leave everything she knew
Right.
and go with it.
Right.
Now, that's always been my favorite of the entire Bible. And I think one reason too, my maternal grandparents had 2 daughters. My paternal grandparents had 4 sons.
Mm-hmm.
And a man in the neighborhood who was my maternal grandfather's friend, came over one day after my grandfather had died, sitting at the table talking to my mother, and he said, Arliss always said O.J. and Arnold were the sons he never had.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard my grandmother make that statement about my mother and her aunt later, that they were the daughters that she never had.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know that there were such things as bitterness and animosity between families, because everybody showed up at my maternal grandparents all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that's the way everybody was until Rick and I got married. When we left Marion County.
There you go.
But you know, that's what God intended,
Mm-hmm.
was for us to love one another, take care of one another, and minister to one another, whatever that need is.
Right. And to do it without any categorical pushback. What can I get, and are you really the person that I want to minister to? Is it going to do me any good? As I've said before, the worst thing the church ever did was give welfare to the government. There it is. All right, that's my final word on Ruth. We'll leave it political. All right, so James it is. 5 chapters, I think. Isn't James 6 chapters, 5, something like that? It's not very long. Is it longer than that, Miss Dot? Okay.
But it might take us a year, 14 weeks.
14 weeks, 25. As I sent Kevin a meme one time when he was doing the 1st and 2nd Peter stuff, and it was, a guy who said, our pastor's been here and he has been preaching through the book of Philippians syllable by syllable since the Reagan administration. That may be us with James.
We might
So there you go. All right, let's pray and we will go and y'all will get to deal with me some more.